My name is Karen Hobert Flynn, and I'm president of Common Cause. And this is Izzy Bronstein, who's going to be assisting us and helping facilitate this call, this video conference. We have many people that will probably still be joining us, but we thought we would get started. We were lucky enough to get Bob's time for the next hour, so we wanted to take full advantage of it. So our goal today is to talk about where we find ourselves in our democracy at Common Cause, and what are some of the issues that we're going to be looking at. And first, we're going to ask Bob Reich, the board chair of Common Cause, to speak about the moment we find ourselves in and his perspective on the issues that we face. And then I will come back and talk about some of the work that Common Cause is going to be focusing on over the next few months and some of our thinking moving forward. So, Bob, if you want to take it from there.
All right, Karen. First of all, let me thank you and Izzy, and thank Common Cause. I've been associated with Common Cause off and on since 1973. Now, I challenge anybody to top me in terms of their loyalty and the duration of their involvement with Common Cause. And I am so pleased and proud to be chair of the governing board. But we are in a terrible position right now, and I don't need to tell all of you, and I certainly don't want anybody who is on this particular podcast to be discouraged. In fact, that's the opposite. My hope and our hope is that you become even more dedicated, more steadfast, more active than you've ever been before. But let me lay out some of the issues that Common Cause is dealing with, that the nation is or will shortly be dealing with in terms of preserving our democracy. And I think that there's no question, and should be absolutely no question in any of your minds, that our democracy is really what is at stake here. In terms of what we face after January 20th, but what we have already faced in one of the most frustrating presidential elections I have ever witnessed, and many of you have ever witnessed. I mean, this is the second presidential election in the past 5 years in which the person who won the popular vote has lost the election. And it looks right now as if Hillary Clinton's lead over Donald Trump in the popular vote is approaching 2.5 million. Now, that's more than 5 times the number of people that Al Gore won the popular vote in the year 2000 from George W. Bush by. This is a huge issue. It's an issue that goes to the very heart of our democracy. And one thing that we all need to be working on is either getting rid of the Electoral College directly or getting rid of it indirectly through the National Popular Vote Project. And by that, I simply mean that having states commit to directing their electors to voting for the presidential candidate that wins the popular vote is the easiest and most direct way of avoiding this absurd, scandalous situation once again. And that seems to me to be something that we need to get behind in a very, very strong and clear way. The second lesson from this 2016 election is the sad lesson we've learned before, but we need to take it to heart and do something even more about it than Common Cause has done up till date. And that is U.S. elections and U.S. elections money talks louder than anywhere else, simply because obviously we spend so much of it. In the 2016 presidential and congressional elections, the spending was $6.8 billion. That is the last and most recent figure we have. And as long as the Supreme Court has held that money is the equivalent of speech and corporations are the equivalent of people, we are going to find more and more money in our elections. And as inequality widens in the United States, that is, more and more of the gains from economic growth go to the top. That is an invitation to more and more corruption. And when I say corruption, I don't mean the kind of corruption in banana republics, so-called. I'm talking about the kind of corruption we have seen that is open and above board and scandalous nonetheless. That is huge amounts of money going to candidates directly in contributions, vast amounts of money going to candidates indirectly in terms of lobbying and lobbying efforts and bundling efforts. Thirdly, what we've seen, and it's not just this election, but what we see continuously, those of us who are Washington watchers, is a huge amount of money being spent by big corporations and wealthy individuals and Wall Street on platoons of lawyers who enter into regulatory proceedings or who litigate in the federal courts and have a huge advantage because they are backed by so much money. Most of us, most other people, small businesses, average Americans, don't have that kind of army of litigators for the federal rulemaking process or even litigation in the federal courts generally. Another aspect of money is the money that is paying all of the experts, expert witnesses, all of the think tanks that are sort of owned indirectly or directly by moneyed interests and are making the case publicly for positions that those moneyed interests want. This is a form of outright propaganda. It's getting out of hand. It's already been out of hand. It's getting worse. And so the public is becoming cynical in the sense that it doesn't believe what it hears. I can completely understand that. Whether you're talking about pharmaceutical companies or Wells Fargo or anybody else with their legions of public relations people who are in many important ways pulling the wool over the public's eyes. In this year's elections, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, 15 states had new restrictions on the right to vote. This is another aspect of losing our democracy. It's part of a systemic effort to suppress the vote, particularly the votes of people of color. Gerrymandered congressional districts make it so that one party, in this case the Democratic Party, must win the popular vote by an overwhelming margin in order to have any hope at all of winning a majority in Congress. So as if that were not enough, all of the things that I've just mentioned were not enough of a challenge, we also now face the prospect of a president who has huge conflicts of interest, financial conflicts of interest. Our president-elect did not, as has been the custom, provide any his taxes to be reviewed. We don't even know the extent of his global financial interests, but there is nothing in place, and he has not agreed to do anything that would give assurance to the public that he is acting or will act as president in the public's interest rather than his own financial interests. Now, putting all of this together, it doesn't really take Russian hacking or Russian propaganda to reveal the ways that our democratic system, small d, our governmental system, is failing most Americans. And it also is failing in a way that is generating what I most fear, and that is a kind of cynicism that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many people say, well, democracy doesn't work, and therefore I'm going to go home. Or if I do participate, I'm going to participate only during elections, and I'm only going to participate in elections when there's somebody who I am very excited about. But my normal way of thinking, my normal way of approaching our democracy, many people might say to themselves, faced with all of these impediments, would be to either not vote or to vote very reluctantly. And certainly between elections, I, as this more cynical voter, this more cynical citizen, is going to say, why bother? What we must do, and this is one reason that I'm so enthusiastic about Common Cause and about the agenda we have in front of us, what we must do is give people hope that this can be turned around, that democracy is worth it, the Common Cause, given our 40 years of working in the trenches on this issue of money in politics, is best prepared to carry on this fight, to alert its members at the federal level and also at the state level as to what can be done and what should be done, to develop the priorities that are necessary, because this is such a miasma of problems and obstacles and challenges, to develop the priorities so that we can all understand what we collectively think is most important to tackle, and get behind that, so we don't diffuse our efforts. I don't know about you, maybe this is an old-fashioned way of thinking, but to me, democracy is critically important. It is our legacy. It is the most important thing we are handing down or potentially handing down to our children and grandchildren. Without our democracy, what are we? We are an oligarchy, and unfortunately, in many ways, fast becoming that. The stakes could not be greater. And given where we are historically right now, I would say Common Cause and Common Cause's role is more important than ever before. So I have a lot more to say, and we look forward to your questions. And Karen, Hobert Flynn, again, thank you so much for being president of Common Cause. Izzy, thank you for your help today. And thank you out there, thousands of you, for your participation and your enthusiasm and your continued involvement with Common Cause. It is our common cause. Our democracy is our most important common cause. Thanks a lot. And Karen, I guess we'll just turn to questions, shall we?
Sure. Okay. First, I thought I would talk a little bit about some of what we're going to do, and then we're going to turn it over to questions. So just so people know me, I've been with Common Cause for more than 25 years. Thank you to all of you who have joined, some of you who are members of Common Cause and others who are new to Common Cause. Common Cause is a nonpartisan organization that works at the national level and the state level to both hold power accountable, but also break down barriers to participation. And we find ourselves in a really challenging moment, as Bob has outlined, with a president who does not understand how the government works. He doesn't understand the rule of law, and it's not clear that he understands the Constitution. And so one of the things, though, he was elected by the Electoral College, not the popular vote, as Bob pointed out, and he is in the process of making some nominations to his administration. It's interesting because he campaigned on efforts to drain the swamp, yet puts in place some people that were really involved in creating the swamp, or definitely contributing to the swamp. So for instance, his deputy campaign manager, David Bossie, brought us the Citizens United challenge to the Supreme Court, and his White House counsel is Doug McGahn, who worked for many years at the FEC and is one of the principal architects of shutting that agency down and making it unable to enforce campaign finance laws. So at the federal level, we are going to have real challenges. And I think it takes us back to the days of Watergate and our founding, when we had to play that watchdog role to hold government accountable. And so we will be carefully analyzing where we can lean in places that make the most impact. We have been very active in calling out conflicts of interest and pointing to concrete solutions that President-elect Trump could take in terms of dealing with his conflicts of interest. We are going to be calling on the head of the House Oversight Committee to hold hearings on those and talk about possible solutions. They were certainly vocal about conflicts of interest with regard to Hillary when she was a candidate. And we will be focusing on an interstate compact for a national popular vote, which is an issue that we've worked on since the early 2000s. As Bob mentioned, we have in our history 5 different times, 5 elections, most recently this election, but also in 2000, where the president won the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. And this system is one that what we need to do is to amend how states allocate their electoral votes. So we don't need to amend the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't speak anything about how states allocate their votes. And so we've been working with a group called National Popular Vote on this interstate compact to pass resolutions through the House and Senate of state legislatures that say we will allocate our electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote, not the state vote, the national popular vote. And that is an issue that we're going to be working on moving forward. We also, as we are battling these fights at the federal level, we need to focus on how do we break down barriers to participation. And the fact is, Common Cause has been doing that kind of work for many, many years. And even with this new election, there are still very real ways that we can do this. One is that we're focused on breaking down barriers so more people can vote. And we focus on vote-centered elections, where votes are, it's easy to register, like online voter registration that brings hundreds of thousands of new registrants into a state. We look at portability and vote by mail so that people have access and they can vote, and we create vote centers to make it more convenient for them to do it. We look at early voting so there aren't long lines and people can vote when it's convenient for them to do so. And we also have been moving reforms for automatic registration, which shifts the burden away from people to register and onto if they do business with the Department of Motor Vehicles, or moving it to other social service agencies. And in fact, in California, where they plan on implementing this, they're looking to move it to public universities. So if a student registers for a class, they're registered to vote. So all of those things can pass and have passed with Republican and Democratic support in states. So we will continue to work on that. And I should also note, at this time when it was a very difficult election, we saw on the ballot reforms that we supported or led the effort to pass in 13 jurisdictions, either state or local level, to pass small donor public financing that puts elections in the hands of small donors rather than wealthy interests. It also means more candidates can run for office because they don't need to be wealthy or connected to special interests to have that. They just need to be willing to work hard and talk to voters about what they represent. And once elected, they're free to vote their conscience and what their constituents want rather than what special interests want who help to pay for their elections. We also passed ethics reform in places like Rhode Island. We saw automatic voter registration passed by a ballot initiative in Alaska, and many other reforms. So we believe that these kinds of reform can still move, and we have to be focusing on them. So in 2018 and 2020, people's votes matter. And in 2020, we also face a new census and a new round of redistricting. And we are focusing on redistricting reform so that it isn't incumbents working to protect themselves and choosing their voters, but rather that voters have the chance to choose their elected representatives. And we've passed this kind of reform like citizens commissions in places like California, and it's our intent to go to the ballot to do this in many other states. So those are some of the things that we'll be focused on moving forward. And before I turn it over to Izzy for some questions that you've submitted, first I want to thank all of you for joining. We've had 1,300 people register to participate in this call, which is the largest we've ever had. And so we thank you for that. And more than 660 questions asked. And we can't answer all of them clearly on this call, but many of them are similar. So we've taken them and put them together in a set of questions that many people have asked. And then also, if you have additional questions, you can email us and we'll work to answer those. So Izzy, why don't we start with questions for Bob and I?
Awesome. So the first question, I think, is for both of y'all, which is from Joanne in South Carolina, who asks, what can we do to stop Trump's business concerns from interfering with the welfare of our government and people? Which you both tackled a little bit. But.
Right. You want to?
Joanne, there is no, right now, there's no law that is going to prohibit that except the Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which is called the Emoluments Clause, which actually prevents foreign governments, foreign dignitaries from providing gifts and anything of value to an officer of the federal government of the United States. There is some evidence that that already may be compromised by Donald Trump, and I think that we've got to be very vigilant, and obviously Common Cause is going to be very, very vigilant about that. But as Louis Brandeis, the great jurist, once said, the best sunlight is the best disinfectant. And by that he meant that simply publicizing, making sure the public knows where those conflicts of interest are or where they're likely to be, and that there is presently no attempt by Donald Trump or his administration to prevent those conflicts of interest, of financial interest. That is also going to be very important. And what Common Cause is going to do, and what we have done so successfully in the past, is to provide that kind of information, to make sure that the public, through the media, is equipped to be a kind of a vigilant safeguard. Now, it is true, Republicans dominate, and I don't mean in any sense for this to sound like a partisan statement. I'm just saying that Republicans who are the same party of Donald Trump are not likely to oppose him on a lot of the things he wants to do with regard to, for example, not putting what his assets into a blind trust. Therefore, we've got to work at many levels. We've got to work through the media. We've got to work through litigation. We've got to work through state governments and at all levels. We've got to mobilize and organize the public, not only about this issue, but about all of the other issues we've talked about. It's not going to be easy. Finding leverage points and being able to actually discover ways that we can influence public policy, and then also use the prospect of the midterm elections and the next general election as ways of getting some of our elected officials in line on these good government democracy issues. All of that is going to be part of our strategy.
That's right. The only thing I would add is, we have been on the record calling for Trump to publish his tax forms, which he has not done, but he really needs to do, because it's hard for us to know or judge, what kind of investments and assets he has unless you can see those. We have also been asking him to divest himself of his assets and properties and put them into a blind trust or its equivalent. At the very least, if he were to convert his businesses, or sells them, and his family remains involved, there has to be a very strict firewall, which is clear between his family and Trump. And even so, I think that there will be real problems with that. We also can talk about barring foreign governments from utilizing Trump properties. I think that there are a number of things that we can point to, and I think pushing Congress to hold the president accountable on this will be very important, and will be some of the actions you'll see coming from Common Cause and many, many of our allies in Washington and around the country around these issues.
Great. The next question comes from California, from Greg, who asks about the national popular vote. And he asks, which states can we target next to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact? Do you want to take that one?
Sure. So the National Popular Vote Compact has passed in 11 jurisdictions, so 10 states and the District of Columbia, and they have 165 electoral votes total. The compact doesn't go into effect until they get enough states with 270 votes. And interestingly enough, there's been interest in this in many states, Republican states and Democratic states. So first, we are going to be urging everyone to contact their state legislators to urge them to support the national popular vote. In part one, it's important for everyone, even those states that passed it, to hear on this. Second, some of the states that we'll be looking at is Connecticut, Oregon, Delaware, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado. But also there's been interest in Utah, Tennessee, Georgia, and many other states. And one of the things we're going to have to take a look is if some of the Republican leaders in those states are going to be more timid to do it immediately after this election, or whether they're ready to continue their progress that they've been involved in moving this. Getting to 165 votes, I believe there's a real opportunity over the next 4 or 5 years to move this. And then judging from what we learned after the 2000 election, people sort of lose interest the further away you get from the election. So to us, it's very important to be working on this over the next couple of years in a really concrete way to move this reform.
Great. The next question I think is great if you take, Bob, which is from Catherine in Illinois, who asks, I'm concerned about Trump's manipulation of the media. What do you think?
Well, Catherine, I'm very concerned about it also. Not only has Trump been berating the media, but he's also been developing, in a way, his own alternative media through his tweets and his video and various ways in which he is even holding rallies. I mean, I'm not familiar with past presidents holding partisan rallies after they've been elected president and saying derogatory things about their opponents in the past election, and kind of going on spewing lies, which is exactly what Donald Trump did in his most recent rally in Cincinnati, in which he said that he won by a landslide. Well, anybody who's watching knows that that is not the truth. In fact, he did not win by a landslide. I mean, Hillary Clinton is now 2.5 million votes ahead, and she may be getting even more votes. We've got these 3 states where recounts are going on, Wisconsin and Michigan and hopefully Pennsylvania. We don't know exactly. I mean, the Electoral College is going to make Donald Trump the next president, assuming that there is not a reversal in outcomes in these 3 states. But these states are very, very close, which goes back to what Karen was saying about the importance of getting rid of the Electoral College, or at least having a national voting rights approach, so that states are going to commit their electors to whoever wins the popular vote. So Donald Trump is attacking the press. And what worries me most is that if you look back historically at the patterns of tyrants and despots in America, and I don't want to overstate the case, and I don't want to alarm anybody unduly, but one of their tactics is to attack the free press. They don't want an independent free press. They would much rather control the press. And then when Donald Trump also talks about opening the libel laws and making it easy for him or other public officials to sue the press for anything he doesn't like that is being said about him, or he goes on tweeting because he doesn't like the satire that's offered by Saturday Night Live. Frankly, that also worries me because we need that independence. We need a press that is willing and able to interrogate and ask hard questions of the person who is occupying the Oval Office, which is just to say, everyone, that our challenge in terms of maintaining and strengthening democratic institutions is larger now than it has been, certainly in my lifetime, including the years of Richard Nixon.
That's right. That's right. You know, just for perspective, Common Cause has a media reform program, and we have focused on things like the open internet, presenting, pushing back against media consolidation. And frankly, given what we're hearing from the FCC and potential nominees to the FCC, we're going to have those battles before us once again, because he's bringing people in from media corporations who support limiting the internet so that there's a fast lane for the wealthy and everybody else has a slow lane that they have to deal with. But we are going to have to go back to fundamentals, which is protecting freedom of the press in ways we haven't had to do. And so we could see a Department of Justice that targets reporters we've seen the president-elect very sensitive to any kind of criticisms, and we have to watch out for retaliation. And he's talked about making change to libel laws. I think that will be a harder thing for him to do. But you can see that he's already broken precedent in terms of press conferences he has. He didn't have a press conference after the election. He did a YouTube video and went straight to voters around the press. One of the values of a press is that they can question him, make him defend his policies, explain himself. And some of that interaction is what we're going to be missing if if he doesn't recognize there's more of a role for the media.
By the way, Karen, I should also add that he has not had a press conference since July 20th. If you go back to the Obama administration, go back to the George W. Bush administration, both of those presidents, Barack Obama and George W. Bush, they had their first press conferences 3 days after they were officially elected. And this is, again, part of Trump's strategy, not to be held accountable by the press. And I just want to emphasize, because this ties a lot of these strings together, what Common Cause does, through its vigilance, through its reporting, through its fact-finding, and through its mobilizing at the federal and also at the state level, is try to hold people accountable who have power, speaking truth to power and making sure our democracy works better. And that's why what we do, what Common Cause is doing, is more important now than ever before.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you both. The next question comes from Charles, who asks, how can we work to reverse gerrymandering and voting restrictions that so severely threaten our democracy? Do you want to start with that one?
Sure. We have been working on redistricting for many years, and we use many different tools. So litigation, where we have brought lawsuits against racial gerrymandering in places like North Carolina, and also we have brought a number of lawsuits against partisan gerrymandering. So one of the things, and we saw Republicans take over the state legislature in North Carolina in 2010, and shortly thereafter drew some district lines that packed most African American and Democratic voters into certain districts so that they could control more of the congressional districts and actually state legislative districts. And so there was, we worked with the NAACP to file litigation against that racial gerrymander, and those in many districts were struck down, and so they had to redraw district lines. The interesting thing is the district lines that they redrew looked very similar and very similar to the racial gerrymander, and they just called it a political gerrymander. And it had the same effect, which is to keep African Americans largely, but other Democrats from having much power. For example, 2 weeks before the election, I was at one of the largest historically Black universities and colleges, North Carolina A&T, and when I went there are 10,000 students, largely African American students, and their campus was split right down the middle. 5,000 students on one side, 5,000 on the other. Why? Because they wanted to dilute the power of their vote in those districts. And so we brought a case against the partisan gerrymander, which we hope will make its way up to the Supreme Court. We also brought a partisan gerrymander case in Maryland, where Democrats were the ones that drew the districts. So Republicans in North Carolina, Democrats in Maryland, and the recent Wisconsin case that came out 2 weeks ago, where a lower court found that the gerrymander done by Wisconsin Republicans was a partisan gerrymander, and they found it unconstitutional. So we're hoping all these cases will make it to the court. And an interesting thing to note is we had an Arizona redistricting case by the Supreme Court with Scalia on the court, where Kennedy voted in favor with the Democrats to uphold the constitutionality of citizen redistricting commissions. So we believe that this court or conservative court still could rule with this on a partisan gerrymander. So one, litigation is a real tool. Second, though, we have reform efforts happening in 12, 14 states, and often with bipartisan support. one reason is that many Republicans in states are seeing the demographic shifts in the population, and they fear that Democrats are going to do to them what they did to Democrats in 2010. And so they're more open to looking at citizens commissions or a nonpartisan staff commission to draw the district lines, possibly looking at retired judges or other reforms. And so we see the opportunity to move reforms really between 2017 and 2019. The time is now, and in some states we're going to be looking at going to the ballot to push for nonpartisan redistricting reform.
The next question is one of my favorites. It's from Glenn in Nebraska. And he says, I hope there is hope. What do you see that makes you optimistic about the future of our democracy? And Bob, if you could take that one.
Glenn, I'll tell you what makes me optimistic. Number one is history. Every time in this nation's past, when we have faced real threats to our system of government, our democracy, and I'll include the era of the robber barons of the 1890s, when they basically corrupted public officials and put their money. I mean, you had their people almost putting sacks of money down on the desks of pliant legislators. And then again, where our whole system almost collapsed in the 1930s. And then again in the 1960s, when we decided that we really did need to get serious about widening disparities, not only of income and wealth, but also racial disparities, when we had to have a Voting Rights Act and a Civil Rights Act, and we needed to bring Black Americans into suffrage, into full citizenship. Again and again, this nation, when we understand what has to be done, has done it. We rolled up our sleeves, put ideology aside, and actually got on with fundamental reforms. And I believe we'll do it again. The other thing that makes me optimistic, quite honestly, is that I spend most of my days, as I am here now at Berkeley, I'm a professor at Berkeley, with young people. And it's not just young people at Berkeley. It's not just 18 to 28-year-olds here at the University of California. I also travel around the country. I was recently talking to Austin, University of Texas students, students at the University of Chicago, all over the country. What I see over and over again are young people who want desperately to reform the system. They understand how dangerous the current system is. Many of them, and again, I don't want to sound partisan, but they were the bedrock of Bernie Sanders' campaign, and Bernie Sanders' campaign was about basically systemic reform. And they're still there. I mean, the students still want this. So that's a second source of my optimism. And a third source of my optimism, frankly, is I do not like the alternative.
That's great. Just a couple of things I will add. One is, and part of this is, I have 4 boys who were very distressed and upset about the election, and they were very passionate, followed every debate, and got very excited by all that they heard. And truthfully, even Trump talked about draining the swamp and talked about corruption in ways that there are people that believe that that is what he's going to do. And so, from my perspective, we need to remember that it was a small minority of people that elected this president. And in fact, for most candidates that run for office, it is a small minority of people who elect them. What we need to do is engage more people in getting involved. And I think that this election has awakened people in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And I think in some ways we do need to shake people out of their, I don't need to pay attention, it doesn't matter what happens, because now many of them find the things they care about, whether it's, climate, it's women's health issues, it's about clean water or food safety or many other reforms, healthcare. The challenge is that we are seeing the instruments of government manipulated in ways that block people's participation. And one of the things I think our movement has done is talk very effectively about what's wrong with government, what's wrong with some of the policies that are in place, and we haven't told enough of the positive stories of what it means to participate or some of the reforms that we put in place. When I worked in Connecticut, I helped to move a small donor public financing program. What does that mean? Democrats and Republicans participate at 74% rate. People who run for office free of that special interest money, relying on small donor contributions, who do they listen to? They listen to their neighbors and constituents, and they come into office with different ideas about what it means to govern. So one state senator now talks about that his constituents care about juvenile justice and why are young African-American males who goof around in class being sent away to prison. Those are the issues he tackles with juvenile justice reform, so that we can point to examples of environmental legislation passing, paid sick days, many different reforms. The things we work on are a means to the vision we want to see our government moving towards, and the promise of democracy, not for the wealthy elite, but for everyone. And so seeing those kinds of reforms pass in places, that gives me hope. And I think we need to do a better job telling those stories and sharing them with people so that they can see that it can make a difference.
Karen, if I may, and I want to get back to your questions as soon as I can, I just want to provide one more cause for optimism. And that is that in the 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks since the election, I've been spending as much time as I can finding people who voted for Donald Trump and talking to Trump voters. And what I found, and I've now uncovered about 45 people who at least admit to me that they voted for Donald Trump. Most of the people who I talk with about voting for Trump, they say, they didn't vote for Trump because of his hatefulness or his racism or his prejudice. They voted for Trump because they thought they wanted to fundamentally change Washington. They wanted to clean up Washington. They were sick and tired of the corruption, and they thought, here's somebody who's an outsider, who's a businessman, who will actually clean it up. They're very concerned about money in politics. In fact, Karen, I don't know that I talked to you about this, but about 3 months ago, I had a conversation in the 7th District of Virginia with a fellow named David Bratt, who is the Conservative Digest says he's a Republican. The Conservative Digest says he's one of the 2 most conservative Republicans in Congress. And what did we talk about? We spent 3 hours talking about the importance of getting big money out of politics and ending crony capitalism in America. Ending corporate welfare, ending all of this kind of corruption through lobbyists and through big corporations and the financial community giving big checks to get favors from politicians. In other words, what gives me optimism here is that there is a groundswell in America. A groundswell of people who are sick and tired of tolerating the direction we're going in terms of the moneyed interests having as much power as they do. And this groundswell is nonpartisan. It is bipartisan. It is true that I don't want to overly, I don't want to sound too pie in the sky. We can't, but it's real. That's what I want to say. It's real, and the Common Cause is going to take advantage of Republicans and Democrats both who really want to change and reform the system.
That's great. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thanks.
The next question comes from Jeannie in Colorado, who says, I think it is more important than ever to focus on issues at the local level. I agree that automatic voter registration is critical, as well as public financing of elections. Does Common Cause plan to take this on?
Thank you, Jeannie, for asking that. And actually, Common Cause has been leading the way on many of those issues, including in Colorado, your home state. We have a terrific chapter led by Elena Nunez, and we have worked and moved a host of reforms in Colorado, including same-day voter registration, vote by mail with vote centers, and are looking at moving towards automatic registration. And actually in Colorado, we've been looking at a small donor public financing in Denver, as a matter of fact. So we are working on this in more than a dozen states where we think there are real prospects for moving automatic registration. And small donor public financing, we have 7 jurisdictions that are looking at it, but just in this last legislative session in California, our team in California led the effort to pass SB 1107, which is a bill that removed the ban on public financing, or where you had to get 2/3 of majority voter take it to the ballot. So there are enormous opportunities in places like California where many jurisdictions want to look at public financing. So we believe that this is a terrific route for us to go. And for those that are interested in getting involved at the state level, we have 35 state chapters. And if you go online to the Common Cause website, www.commoncause.org, you can look up your state and your state contact and volunteer if you're interested. So thank you, Jeannie.
Great. Okay. This isn't the last question. We're almost out of time. And this is by far the question we've gotten the most, which is from Stira in New Jersey, who says, many of my friends are energized to do something. Where do we start?
That's a great question. Do you want to say anything now?
I'll tell you, the good news is that people are fired up. And cynicism does not prevail. In fact, what I've seen across the country is people asking exactly the same question. Where do I start? What can I do? And the second piece of good news is that there are a lot of places to start. What we would recommend is one important place to start is Common Cause, getting involved if you aren't already involved. As Karen says, we've got 35 state chapters. There is no other major national organization working on the important fundamental issues of democracy that has 35 state chapters and that there's doing so much at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, and you can get involved tomorrow. In fact, don't even wait till tomorrow. Get involved right now, because there is so much to do.
That's great. Thank you. You know, we will be sending out email and action alerts around Trump's conflict of interest challenges. We're going to be urging and focusing our activity towards the House Oversight Committee and Government Reform Committee to urge them to hold hearings. There are going to be action days and work on national popular vote. Again, we hope you'll contact your local chapters to get involved, because we have many campaigns at the local level. And we also hope you'll consider contribution to Common Cause. We have been encouraging people to become monthly givers. Just like with NPR, you can give a smaller amount that can have a greater impact over the course of time. And if you are interested in doing that, you can go to the Common Cause website, commoncause.org/monthly, to become a monthly giver. Go to our website, and also you can email us at grassroots@commoncause.org. And we can also connect you to national campaigns that we have around redistricting, national popular vote, ethics, money in politics, media reform. There are going to be more opportunities than we can count right now. The truth is, we don't know what's going to be around the corner. We expect that we are going to be inundated with many challenges come January with this administration, and we will be working in coalition at the state level and the national level, and also identifying the things where Common Cause can uniquely play an important role or add real value in issues that affect our democracy. So we urge you to give your time, your activism, and if so willing, also your resources to support our work. We would appreciate it very much.
Wonderful. I think if you want to do some final thoughts and close us out.
Well, all I can say, I want to thank Karen and Izzy. I want to thank the Common Cause staff. It's the best staff any organization could ever want. And thank the thousands of people who have volunteered their time and their energy and their money to Common Cause, because, again, it is our common cause. I want to emphasize this. There's nothing more fundamental than making our democracy work. And whatever you care about, the climate and climate change, or if you care about poverty and minimizing, eradicating, reducing poverty, if you care about the problem of mass incarceration and the militarization of our police, if you care about whatever the issue is in terms of fundamental reform, making our democracy work is a prerequisite to everything else. And that's why this cause is so common. And that's why it is so necessary and so important. So thanks to everybody already involved. Please do get involved, and we'll speak to you soon.
Great. Thank you. And thanks, Bob.